My name is Sergeant James Walker, and if you had told me at the start of my military career that I'd find myself crawling through the darkness beneath the jungles of Vietnam, I might have laughed. But there I was, knee-deep in mud, leading a squad tasked with uncovering the secrets of an underground network that had baffled many before us. This is the tale of how we first came to understand the depths of the war we were fighting, a tale etched deep into my memory. The story begins in the sweltering heat of Vietnam during the mid-50s, a time when the land was scared by conflict and the air hung heavy with the smell of napalm and fear. The dense jungles and expansive rice paddies, which seemed so picturesque in photographs back home, were the battlegrounds of a conflict that was as much about ideology as it was about territory. It was during an intense firefight in the late 60s that we first stumbled upon the Viet Cong's tunnel entrances, hidden beneath a seemingly innocuous village hut. We had been patrolling the area, alert to the slightest rustle that could signal an ambush. The discovery was almost accidental, prompted by a collapsing section of earth under one of my men's feet. What we found beneath was not just a hole in the ground, but a gateway to a complex labyrinth of tunnels. These tunnels, as we would soon learn, were the lifeblood of the Viet Cong, allowing them to move unseen, strike unexpectedly, and disappear into the earth as quickly as they had emerged. The network was vast, stretching under villages, through jungles, and even beneath American bases. It was an underground fortress, complete with barracks, hospitals, and command centers, all hidden from the prying eyes of aerial reconnaissance and ground patrols. Realizing the significance of our find, I reported it up the chain of command. The response was swift. We were to engage immediately and assess the extent of the network. The task was daunting. The entrances were narrow, often booby-trapped, and required us to enter a world that was completely alien to us, an underground realm where the rules of surface warfare no longer applied. To combat this hidden enemy, the Allied forces had formed units of tunnel rats, a brave group of men chosen for their smaller stature and their ability to maneuver in confined spaces. These men were the first to volunteer to enter the tunnels after our discovery. Armed with nothing more than a pistol, a flashlight, and a knife, they descended into the earth to face the unknown. The engagement of these tunnel rats marked a turning point in our understanding of guerrilla warfare. They explored, mapped, and fought in conditions that most of us couldn't fathom. Their reports were our first real insight into the scale of the Viet Cong's underground operations, revealing a network sophisticated enough to sustain significant numbers of troops right under our feet. As the bombing campaigns intensified above ground, with forests being leveled and entire landscapes transformed by Agent Orange and other chemicals, the tunnels became even more critical to the Viet Cong's resistance. They were not only military assets but also sanctuaries against the overwhelming technological might of the Allied forces. In reflecting on that time, I can't help but marvel at the dual nature of our mission. Above ground, we fought with the might of an advanced military power, yet below ground, we were drawn into an ancient form of warfare, pitting man against man in the most primal of conditions. It was a stark reminder of the complexities of the Vietnam War, a conflict that was as much underground as it was above. Looking back, those early days of discovery were filled with a mix of awe and horror. We were venturing into the unknown, not just geographically, but also strategically and morally. Each step into those tunnels was a step into the darkness of the human soul, where the fight for survival often overshadowed the higher ideals we claimed to defend. This was just the beginning of a long and grueling part of our campaign, one that would change many of us forever. The days following our initial discovery of the tunnel network marked a shift in our strategy and a deepening of our engagement in this unfamiliar theater of war. As I reflect on those times, I realize how little we knew about what lay beneath our feet and how much we had to learn about the enemy's methods. After our initial encounter with the tunnels, it became clear that the Viet Cong had masterfully leveraged their knowledge of the local terrain. The tunnels were not just hideouts, they were a full-fledged underground military system, complete with supply routes, living quarters, and operational bases. This network allowed the Viet Cong to launch attacks throughout South Vietnam, virtually disappearing into thin air as they retreated back into their subterranean sanctuaries. Our command, realizing the extent of this challenge, decided to deploy specialized units known as tunnel rats. These were brave souls, men who volunteered for one of the most dangerous duties in the war. I remember the first batch of tunnel rats who joined us at base camp. They were a mix of American, Australian, and New Zealander soldiers, each man surprisingly eager to dive into the unknown. The training for these men was brutal. They had to learn how to navigate in pitch darkness, detect and disarm booby traps, and engage the enemy in confined spaces. Their gear was minimal: a standard issue .45 caliber pistol, a flashlight, and a combat knife. Each piece of equipment was chosen for its reliability and ease of use in tight spaces. Their bravery was something that went beyond normal soldierly duty. It was a dive into the abyss, both literally and metaphorically. We began coordinating with these tunnel rats to conduct more systematic explorations and raids. Each operation was meticulously planned, with maps drawn from the descriptions provided by the few who had ventured inside and managed to come back. I was involved in planning several of these missions, working closely with the tunnel rats to understand the layout and anticipate the challenges they might face. One of the most significant operations was an attempt to clear a major tunnel hub we believed was used as a regional command center by the Viet Cong. The operation was set to commence at dawn. The night before, I sat with the team that would enter the tunnels. The atmosphere was tense, but there was also a sense of brotherhood that only those who face death so closely can truly understand. The next morning, as the tunnel rats disappeared one by one into the earth, the rest of us waited in silence. The hours passed slowly, each minute stretching out as we listened for any sounds of distress or signs of combat. The operation took hours, but when the men finally emerged, they'd brought with them valuable intelligence: maps of other tunnel entrances, Viet Cong strategy documents, and even some prisoners who would later provide further insights. These operations, while successful, were not without cost. We lost good men, men who had become my friends. The confines of the tunnels were unforgiving, and the Viet Cong fought with a ferocity that was magnified by the desperation of fighting on their own ground. Each loss was a blow not just to our numbers but to our morale. Despite these hardships, the engagements within the tunnels provided us with critical insights into the enemy's operations. We learned their patterns, their shifts in strategy, and most importantly, we began to understand the psyche of our adversary. They were not just fighting for territory. They were fighting for a cause they believed in deeply, and they were prepared to use every advantage they had to win. This period of the war, filled with underground skirmishes and strategic revelations, was a pivotal chapter in my military career. It taught me that war is not just fought with guns and bombs, but with knowledge and perseverance. It was a harsh lesson in the art of war, one that I would carry with me long after the jungles of Vietnam had faded into the backdrop of my life. In the shadows of the Vietnam jungles, our encounters with the Viet Cong's booby traps became a daily grim reminder of the cunning and resolve of our adversaries. The tunnels were laced with a variety of traps designed not just to kill, but to maim and psychologically terrorize us, wearing down the morale of even the toughest soldiers. I remember one particular morning, crisp with the smell of wet foliage after a night's rainfall. We were moving through an area recently reclaimed from the Viet Cong, searching for remaining traps. A young soldier, not much older than 19, stepped on a punji stick trap, sharpened bamboo sticks smeared with feces to cause infection. His screams echoed through the jungle, a stark reminder of the brutal nature of this war. This incident cemented the harsh reality of guerrilla warfare in our minds. It was not only about facing the enemy in combat, but also about surviving the environment they had crafted so meticulously. These booby traps varied from simple pit traps to complex explosive devices. Each discovery required us to halt and carefully dismantle the threat, slowing our progress and straining our nerves. The psychological toll was immense, as the fear of the unseen became as formidable a foe as the soldiers we fought against. The intensity of these encounters deepened as we began to engage more directly within the tunnels. These subterranean battles were unlike anything I had ever experienced. The confined spaces forced us into close quarters combat, where every shadow or sudden movement could mean life or death. I led several patrols myself, and each venture into the underground mazes was a harrowing ordeal, testing our courage and resolve. During one such patrol, we encountered a small group of Viet Cong, hidden within a side chamber of a tunnel. The firefight that ensued was chaotic, the air thick with gun smoke and the sound of gunfire reverberating off the tight walls. We managed to overcome the enemy, but the victory was hollow. Each life lost, whether friend or foe, was a reminder of the tragedy of this conflict. The tunnels also exposed the ideological battles that underpinned this war. Captured Viet Cong sometimes spoke to us of their reasons for fighting. They weren't just soldiers. They were fathers, sons, and protectors of their homeland. This war wasn't black and white, and the more we learned from them, the more the lines of right and wrong blurred. It was a war of ideologies, each side believing in the righteousness of their cause, yet both caught in an endless cycle of violence. Despite the adversities, we adapted. Our strategies evolved as we learned more about enemy tactics. We started to employ our own forms of psychological warfare, using their tactics against them, disseminating disinformation, and exploiting known fears. It was a dark path, but in war, every advantage had to be pursued. Living and fighting in these conditions had a profound impact on all of us. The constant stress, the humidity, and the omnipresent danger of the jungle wore down even the strongest men. I saw seasoned soldiers crack under the pressure, their spirits broken by the unrelenting tension of guerrilla warfare. As the conflict wore on, the distinction between soldier and environment faded. We became part of the jungle, our senses heightened to every rustle and crack. The jungle, with all its perils, became our home, and we its wary inhabitants. This transformation was not just physical but mental. The jungle and the tunnel shaped us, molded our perceptions of warfare, and changed us in ways that would linger long after the war ended. Reflecting on those days, I realized that the hidden enemy was not just the Viet Cong or the booby traps they set. It was also the unseen psychological enemy within each of us, the fear, the uncertainty, and the moral ambiguity of a war that asked more of us than we were prepared to give. This was the real battle, fought in the depths of our souls, as much as in the tunnels and jungles of Vietnam. Life in Vietnam was a daily test of endurance and adaptability, both for the soldiers on the front lines and for the civilians caught in the crossfire. The daily struggles were compounded by the ever-present threat of an enemy who could be hiding just beneath your feet or watching from the trees. Each morning, as we woke to the sound of helicopters overhead and the distant rumble of artillery, the first task was always a sweep for booby traps left overnight. Even the walk to the mess tent was fraught with potential danger. The war had taught us to never take a single step for granted. The harsh living conditions were another layer of the war's reality. The heat was stifling, the humidity unrelenting, and the monsoon rains turned everything into a muddy swamp. Diseases were rampant, and even the strongest among us fell victim to bouts of dysentery and malaria. For the local villagers, life had changed drastically. Villages that once thrived on agriculture were now battlegrounds. Many villagers were displaced, their homes destroyed by bombs or turned into military outposts. I remember seeing children, no older than 10, who knew how to dismantle an unexploded bomb, a skill no child should ever need. This transformation of village life was one of the war's cruelest realities. These were not soldiers, yet they bore the brunt of the war's savagery. Amidst this chaos, moral dilemmas were an everyday occurrence. One afternoon, while patrolling a recently secured village, we encountered a group of women and children hiding in a cellar. They were terrified, unsure if we were there to help them or harm them. Our medic provided first aid, and we shared our rations, but the encounter left a deep impression on me. The lines between friend and foe were blurred by war's indiscriminate nature. On another occasion, we faced a difficult decision when we discovered a cache of Viet Cong weapons in a local school. The school had been evacuated, but the presence of weapons put it on our target list for bombing. The decision to destroy a place once filled with laughter and learning was not taken lightly. Each choice like this weighed heavily on our conscience, questioning the rightness of our actions. The ethical challenges extended to our engagements with the enemy. Capturing a Viet Cong soldier often led to intense interrogations. Information was crucial, but the methods used to obtain it sometimes pushed the boundaries of what many of us considered humane. These moments tested our principles and forced us to confront the darker aspects of warfare. As soldiers, we were also tasked with protecting convoys of food and medical supplies, not only for our troops but for the civilians who had little left. I recall one convoy mission where we were ambushed. The firefight that ensued was fierce, and while we managed to drive off the attackers, the convoy suffered significant losses. The supplies that did get through were a lifeline for many, but the cost in lives left us questioning if it was enough. Through all these hardships, bonds were formed that went beyond the usual camaraderie of soldiers. We relied on each other not just for tactical support, but for emotional strength. The men I served with became my brothers, each of us holding on to whatever piece of humanity the war had left us. As the sun set each day, casting long shadows over the land, we gathered to share stories from home, a brief respite from the realities of war. These moments of shared humanity, laughter, and tears were what kept us going. They reminded us of why we fought and what we hoped to return to. Reflecting on those days, I see them as a mosaic of courage, fear, and the indomitable human spirit. The war was not just a series of battles, but a profound journey through the complexities of human nature, set against the backdrop of Vietnam's besieged villages and the hidden dangers of jungle warfare. As the war progressed, our efforts to map and understand the Viet Cong's tunnel network led to some of the most significant strategic discoveries of the conflict. Each operation beneath the earth brought its share of revelations, shaping our tactics and our understanding of what it would take to overcome an enemy so deeply entrenched. One particular operation stands out in my memory, a mission intended to secure and explore a major tunnel complex we believed was central to the Viet Cong's operations in the region. The intelligence had come from a combination of aerial reconnaissance and information extracted during interrogations. It suggested that this complex was not just a transit route, but a command hub, crucial to their logistics and coordination. The night before the operation, I briefed the men who would go down into the depths. I saw the resolve in their eyes, mixed with the apprehension that always accompanied such missions. We knew the risks, the claustrophobia of the narrow passageways, the danger of booby traps, and the likelihood of direct encounters with the enemy. Yet there was a palpable sense of determination among the men. This was our chance to strike at the heart of the enemy's operations. As dawn broke, the tunnel rats geared up, disappearing into the earth with nothing but their flashlights and sidearms. Back on the surface, we set up a perimeter, waiting for any sign of trouble or distress from below. The hours ticked by slowly, each minute stretching out as we strained to hear anything from the depths. The operation turned when, several hours later, the tunnel rats emerged, weary but triumphant. They brought with them maps of interconnected tunnels, documents, and even several high-value prisoners. These finds were a goldmine of intelligence, offering us insights into the Viet Cong's strategic planning and operational tactics. For the first time, we had a clear picture of how extensive and well-organized the tunnel network was. This intelligence allowed us to adjust our overall strategy in the region. Knowing the locations of key hubs within the network, we could disrupt the Viet Cong's movements and cut off their supplies. It was a turning point in how we conducted the war, shifting from reactive patrols to proactive strikes based on solid intelligence. However, these successes came at a cost. The confined spaces of the tunnels were brutal combat zones. During one such encounter, We lost several good men to a booby-trapped passageway. The loss weighed heavily on me. These were men I had come to respect deeply, soldiers who had shown incredible bravery in the face of almost certain danger. The impact of these tunnel engagements wasn't just tactical, it was personal. Each venture into the darkness brought us face to face with our own fears and with the stark realities of this unconventional war. The tunnels were a constant reminder of the enemy's resilience and ingenuity, traits that, grudgingly, I came to respect. As our understanding of the tunnel network grew, so did our respect for the Viet Cong's capabilities. They had turned their knowledge of the land into a formidable weapon against a technologically superior foe. This was guerrilla warfare at its most effective, and it forced us to adapt and evolve in ways we hadn't anticipated at the start of a conflict. Reflecting on those days, the mixture of fear, adrenaline, and determination is still palpable. The tunnels were more than just a military challenge. They were a psychological battleground, testing our resolve and our ability to overcome not just the physical obstacles, but the shadowy uncertainties of such a hidden warfare. These were the lessons carved into the soul of every man who entered those dark passages, and they shaped the course of the war in ways that only those who lived it could fully understand. The war in Vietnam, with its dense jungles and shadowy foes, took a toll on us that went far beyond the physical. As the months turned into years, the cost of this conflict, both in human lives and moral certainty, grew heavier with each day. One of the most difficult aspects of this war was dealing with the casualties. Not a day went by without some of us falling sick or getting injured, and the death toll was a constant reminder of the war's brutality. Each loss hit hard, but losing men in the tunnels was particularly harrowing. These weren't just soldiers. They were friends, brothers with whom I had shared more than just a foxhole. They had families waiting for them at home, families who would now receive a folded flag instead of a joyful reunion. The psychological impact of these losses was profound. Watching young men, some just out of their teens, cope with the stress of combat and the grief of losing their comrades was heart-wrenching. Many of us, myself included, were haunted by nightmares and the faces of those we couldn't save. The term shell shock was used in past wars. We just called it the burden we had to bear. As the war dragged on, the lines between combat operations and survival blurred. Every patrol, every mission carried the potential for ambush or disaster. We learned to live with the constant adrenaline of combat, the rush of fear tempered by the need to stay alert and alive. This state of heightened awareness changed a man, made him more resilient in some ways, but also more vulnerable to the simple things, like the sound of rain or the silence of a night without gunfire. The relentless pace of operations meant that we seldom had time to grieve or even process the events we lived through. We just moved on to the next objective, the next battle. But the accumulation of these experiences began to weigh on us, eroding the sharp edges of our youthful enthusiasm and replacing them with a somber determination to just keep going. The conflict's persistence also reshaped our perspective on the war. Initially, many of us saw this as a clear-cut fight against communism, a defense of freedom on distant shores. But as we encountered villagers who just wanted to live their lives without the constant threat of violence, our understanding of enemy and ally became less defined. The war was not just about ideologies from half a world away. It was about the people right in front of us, whose lives had been upturned by conflict. This shift in perspective was not easy for everyone. Some clung to the black and white morality of war to keep themselves focused, while others, like me, found themselves questioning the very foundations of our involvement. These internal conflicts became as challenging as the battles we fought against the Viet Cong. Through all these challenges, the bonds we formed became our anchor. The camaraderie among the soldiers, the shared experiences, and the mutual understanding of the cost we were all paying gave us the strength to face each day. We relied on each other not just for tactical support, but for emotional survival. As the end of my tour approached, the thought of leaving Vietnam brought a mix of relief and guilt. Relief at the prospect of returning home, away from the gunfire and the traps, and guilt for leaving behind the men who had become my second family, and a country still mired in conflict. Reflecting on this chapter of the war, it's clear that the toll it took was not just measured in the battles won or lost, but in the personal transformations we all underwent. The war changed us in ways that would take years to fully understand, shaping our views on life, duty, and the very essence of human conflict. As the conflict in Vietnam drew toward its inevitable and tumultuous end, the echoes of battle rang long in the ears of those who survived. The war's conclusion did not bring the clear-cut sense of victory or defeat that some had hoped for, but rather a complex tapestry of emotions and unresolved questions about the future. With the American withdrawal finalized in 1973, I watched as many of my fellow soldiers packed up, their faces a mix of relief and apprehension. The departure was bittersweet, while we longed to return home to our families and loved ones, leaving behind the land and the people we had come to know so intimately over the years felt like abandoning a part of ourselves. The fall of South Vietnam in 1975, 2 years after our departure, was a hard pill to swallow. The news hit like a sledgehammer, undoing any illusions about the war's outcome. The images of the fall, broadcasted across the world, brought a finality that was both shocking and inevitable. It forced us to confront the reality that our sacrifices and those of countless others might have been in vain. As I returned to civilian life, the adjustment was anything but easy. The sounds of gunfire and the adrenaline of combat had been replaced by the mundane rhythms of everyday life. Yet, the war never really left me. The memories, both horrific and heroic, were etched deeply into my mind, surfacing in quiet moments and restless dreams. Reflection became a part of my daily routine. I pondered the strategic decisions, the alliances formed, and the lives altered forever by a conflict that was as much ideological as it was physical. The questions of what we fought for, and whether it was worth the cost, haunted me. These reflections were not just about reconciling the past, but also about understanding the impact of our actions on the future of Vietnam and its people. I also took it upon myself to reach out to fellow veterans. Many of us struggled with similar burdens, the invisible wounds of war that did not heal with time. Together, we found solace in shared experiences, in the knowledge that we were not alone in our struggles. This camaraderie, born in the jungles of Vietnam, proved vital in our collective healing process. The war had changed us all, shaping our views on life, duty, and morality. The young, idealistic soldier who first set foot in Vietnam had evolved into a man who understood the complexities of human conflict, the shades of gray that pervaded every decision, every battle. This understanding was a heavy burden, but also a profound source of wisdom. As I began to share my experiences, first with family and then with a broader audience, I realized the importance of storytelling in the healing process. Each story told was a piece of the past, a lesson learned that could help prevent future conflicts from claiming so many lives and souls. In writing down these memories, my hope was to honor those who did not return, to ensure their sacrifices were remembered not just as footnotes in a history book, but as poignant reminders of the cost of war. These stories, these echoes of battle, serve as both a tribute and a warning. Now, looking back on those years spent in the depths of Vietnam's jungles and tunnels, I see not just a history of warfare, but a continuing narrative of resilience and adaptation. The legacy of Vietnam is not defined by the war alone, but by the enduring spirit of those who lived through it, who returned with stories to tell and lessons to impart. This chapter of my life, marked by both darkness and light, remains a pivotal era that shaped the person I have become.